So we're going to be doing the panel for Zero Trust Architecture for Critical Infrastructures. Our policy presenter is Regan Bossie. He's a final year undergraduate student at Embry-Riddle and is majoring in computer engineering. We have Miss Ebony Pierce, who is currently a subject matter expert at I messed that up. She's also a member of the Team Awareness Product Center, which develops private and governmental software for Android platforms to be used on the field. And then Ferrando-Klemet, who is a senior cyber engineer here at USF and has about 20 years of experience in the industry.
All right, thank you. So I wanted to start off by giving a definition of zero trust. So zero trust defined by NIST is a mechanism that seeks to mitigate the risk associated with a system that is viewed as compromised. And what that means is zero trust is a control. It controls data, it controls services, it controls people at its fundamental level. I like to describe this with the adage, nothing is what it says it is, and no one who is who they say they are. And in that sense, it's an iterative system, it should be at least, that authenticates and authorizes users in a system. So, the problem. Competition in cybersecurity space is on a spectrum from peace to war. And this includes actors such as nation states, rogue agents, and hacktivists that perpetrate cyber attacks that deny, degrade, defend, and destroy, and also commit espionage. And because of this, and specifically on critical infrastructure, when we have a highly integrated society where economics, politics, and the economy, and society rather, are integrated very tightly, critical infrastructure, when it's threatened and or attacked, societal disruption is caused. And the more tightly integrated we are as a society, the more widespread it is. So this is why this is an important topic. And when we talk about cybersecurity, we often use the CIA triad, which stands for confidentiality, integrity, and availability. When when critical infrastructure is attacked, availability is often what's undermined. For example, water treatment plants or facilities, when they're attacked, clean water isn't available. When power grids are attacked, electricity isn't available. So when we're talking about creating a policy solution, we have to consider something that protects and ensures availability and human life and safety. Another important concern that I would like to bring up about critical architecture is that a lot of it's old. These are systems that could have been created in the 1960s or a little bit later, but without the first and consideration of cybersecurity and an integrated effort of it. And they also can run off of legacy systems. So this is a major concern. They're not patched, they're not updated like a regular operating system, and this can expose critical infrastructure to a lot more vulnerabilities. So in further categorizing the problem, I would like to talk about cyberspace. Cyberspace is not static, it's dynamic, meaning that vulnerabilities, exploits, bugs are constantly being added to a system, and malign actors are always moving, always finding a way into the system. So what this means is that policies are in cybersecurity often oriented around defense, and keywords are resiliency and recovery. And that is kind of the assumption that, yes, we will make it harder for attackers to get into a system, but we also have to have recovery and adaptability in our systems as well. And final consideration is that in the development of technology, it's a life cycle from development to deployment, and the human element is always involved. And when the human element is involved, a mistake will eventually happen. So I am proposing a policy that hopes to consider human behavior in the human element and creating controls that considers that. And not only considers it, but facilitates its success. So in our current policy documentation, we outline some key things, one of which is threat intelligence. And threat intelligence is the action of creating a list and researching what type of malware and what kind of malign actors exist that would target your systems. And what we find out is that, especially since cyberspace is dynamic, this is a non-exhaustive list. It's never complete. We're always working on it. And especially since that is non-exhaustive, when we're talking about risk mitigation, we have to prioritize. Industries, whether it's private or public, have limited resources. And so that there's a key to that prioritization. And it's that we look to see what is the most effective, what do we want to protect, and we protect that first. And that way we maximize our security on limited resources. And this is key to my proposal. I want to emphasize that policy should be pushed down to a lower level. And that what I would like to see is federal leadership create a fundamental standard of zero trust, and then have those prioritization decisions and the specificity of the industry be added by the industry itself through prioritization. And I think this is additionally helpful because going back to that human element, we want to consider human behavior. And a key problem is security fatigue. And security fatigue, for those who don't know, is this idea that employees are most incentivized to do their jobs. And so when you have security measures that gets in the way of that, you will have employees that will become complacent, become frustrated, or even undermine the security measures itself. And that leaves a system vulnerable. So going back to prioritization, if we use that, we can minimize security fatigue and maximize security itself. And one last consideration that I wanted to mention is, second to last, is that we don't want a federal policy that's too broad. And that's what I'm talking about, is moving that decision-making as low as possible. Because if we have a broad policy, kind of just encourages checking that box, right? We've met the security measures, but we haven't really considered what is vulnerable, what we're protecting, and we haven't considered our employees' needs. So there's a risk there. It should be standardized and fundamental, but it shouldn't be the driving force in our security life cycle. And one thing that I wanted to kind of set up for the conversation was that when we're talking about decision makers and policy makers, we're not talking just about private industry and the federal government. There are local governments, there are state governments, and there are international governments, all of which maintain a network. And we want a policy that is comprehensive in that sense. A strong network for our international allies means a strong network for us as well. It's communal. Cyberspace is a communal space. So that should definitely be considered in a zero trust policy, as making it a more comprehensively adapted ideology. Yeah. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much for those insights and that proposal. Before I get into my questions here, I'd like to open up the floor to our professional panelists. And if you guys have some insight to any of his policy points throughout this conversation, the floor is open to you guys.
I guess I'll go first then. So I think you bring up a really good point about legacy systems. Critical infrastructure is full of legacy systems because they're so expensive to replace. So systems that run on Windows 95 or Windows XP or any other older systems we've had, which makes them certainly more difficult to secure. And that's where we get into, as you look at the different policies and zero trust, where you have to take that step back and look at defense in depth, which is making sure that you have more than one thing protecting your critical infrastructure or your data or whatever it is that you're trying to protect.
Thank you. So Regan, you brought up a lot of really interesting points, from the threat intelligence to the legacy systems to the human side of security fatigue to the lattice matrix that's going to be required from an international perspective of the critical infrastructures that exist. One of the things that I thought was particularly significant about what it was that you brought up was the prioritization. And this becomes really, really important when we are looking at the implementation of a true zero trust architecture. Because until you can identify the necessity of what needs to be protected, you won't be able to implement the defense in depth that you mentioned, Anne. And so when you say that we want to have a broad policy from a national standpoint to allow this to push down to local and state responsibilities for more precise implementation, I would absolutely and totally agree with you. The challenge that exists with this, though, is that we also have to have the knowledge and understanding in these state and local spaces to be able to execute it in a way that makes sense. And when we're talking about critical infrastructure, we're talking about infrastructure that is deemed to be a basic necessity for day-to-day survival, right? Now, CISA, they have a list of critical infrastructure. It's like communication, transportation, but like at the very base, as you mentioned, is probably water. When we're looking at water and we're looking at wastewater and we're looking at what that critical infrastructure looks like from a technology perspective, we also have to keep in mind what that looks like from a physical perspective as well. Because like in Florida, we can have a bunch of areas where we maintain and clean water, but if a hurricane shows up, how are we protecting it? How are we keeping the wastewater from not impacting the drinking water that we need, right? Besides telling everybody to run to Costco and get a couple cases of water. So all of these are absolutely things to keep in mind, not just as we look at the architecture, but as we look at the sustainability of policies over time, right? Because when you mention, Anne, that we have a lot of legacy systems, we absolutely do. And we don't take the time to address these legacy systems to figure out how to modernize them for sustainability purposes. So it was in 1960, yeah, okay, it functions right now, but what happens when our oldest engineer decides that they're going to legitimately retire? And now we don't have an option to pivot. So I think all of those are really important things that we do need to definitely keep in mind as we establish long-lasting policies that will help us to progress and modernize. Thank you.
All right, some wonderful input there. I'm going to get into my questions here. I'm going to take a step back. We've used a lot of technical terms here. The terms zero trust, critical infrastructure predominantly stand out. Could you guys provide a quick definition about what zero trust is, some of the characteristics of it, and what infrastructure is critical?
I'll do zero trust. Anne's going to take critical infrastructure.
Thank you.
So I typically like to bring definitions down to the common denominator. And what I'm going to use an example of this is online dating. If you are a person and you go onto an online dating app, inevitably, you don't trust anyone on there. You think that their pictures are suspicious. You think that their profile is suspicious. You don't know if that's their real name. That might not be their real age. They're probably married, all of these things, right? You just have a wide variety of trust issues with this particular item. And so you have to figure out a way to provide enough information to create a trust bond while not sharing too much to put you at risk, right? That's the same thing that we do for every single network that we work on, every single architecture we build, every single system that we implement. When we are looking at zero trust, we are looking to have this other person verify each of the things that they say to us and verify themselves at each point in which we interact. So, for example, when you log in, presumably the app that you're on has already verified this person. They have verified this person through their name, through their pictures, through whatever random AI identity ridiculousness that they've implemented, right? So at that point, you not only trust that person, but you also trust that app to have done what it needs to have done. So now this is your first layer of trust, and now you are going to start to grant this person entitlements to you. So now this person can know your name. This person can see more pictures of you once they've verified their identity. Maybe you meet in person, a public place, always initially a public place, because presumably this person has some sort of societal constraints where they're not going to immediately attack you where people are watching, right? That's the expectation, right? So the same way that we do this in our personal lives, we want to look at this same thing when we're looking at our zero trust. When a computer accesses our network, has it been patched? Does it have antivirus? When a computer accesses our network, is this our computer? Have we issued it? When we are looking at how this computer is accessing the network, is it doing things that we have permitted, or is it attempting to do something that is abnormal? And so when we're looking at our system of zero trust architecture, we're taking that exact same mindset where we trust initially, but we verify consistently.
I love that. I'm never going online dating again.
I think you should. Just invest, just lean in.
So for critical infrastructure, as we've already kind of mentioned, critical infrastructure is the stuff we rely on to get through our day-to-day lives. Things like water, electric, communications. CISA does have online, you can Google it, a list of 16 critical infrastructures. I do not have them all memorized. But they are the things that make our lives easier as we live in the modern world.
All right, wonderful. Thank you, guys. Just a reminder, this is an open panel. If you guys in the crowd have any questions, please raise your hand. We have microphone runners that'll get out to you guys. Do not feel shy. All right, 2 questions.
Check. Okay. So my name is Austin Welch. I study global conflict studies, cybersecurity, and languages at Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University. So my question is, we've learned in class that a lot of the internal risks is like human error, a human factor. So how would you like to fully participate in zero trust architecture or defense in depth? How would you battle the dichotomy between security and convenience?
You certainly have to take both of those into account. As Regan had mentioned, once you hit security fatigue, and it doesn't even have to be security fatigue, it can be alert fatigue. If you have, even in your house, if your smoke alarm is going off all the time when you make toast, you know what I do? I turn on the fan next to the smoke alarm so it doesn't go off anymore, right? So you have that same kind of mentality with all of us. And so as we go through and implement zero trust or any security feature in critical infrastructure or anywhere, we take into account, because it's not an either or, it's an and. How many alerts can I reasonably expect my technician to respond to? And that's the prioritization that you brought up, is that I want my technician to only respond to the alerts that are super important right away. And so I'll have my list of, hopefully the software I'm using has set that up so that I have critical alerts. Yes, the boiler is about to go over temp. Well, that's super important, and I need you to look at that. Or here there's somebody's knocking on the door, but I don't know who they are. I haven't trusted them yet, so I can ignore them for a minute and deal with that later.
I think one of the most important aspects of battling this dichotomy is leveraging cross-functional teams. One of the challenges that you will experience throughout your career as you transition into the workforce is that it's very commonly an expectation that you know everything. In your head, you think you have to know everything, but in actuality, you can't really be good at everything. And so when we're looking at a comprehensive implementation of a zero trust architecture, or even a cybersecurity program in general, it's important to understand where your strengths and your weaknesses lie. When we're looking at an alert fatigue, for example, we may be able to leverage a library scientist or a data scientist to be able to appropriately filter those out. We may be able to leverage a psychologist to be able to understand the point at which mental fatigue will occur. We may be able to leverage writers to be able to adjust the policies in a way that's comprehensive for all of the individuals on your team. We may need graphic artists to be able to incorporate icons that are quickly understood and to leverage colors that don't salt the eyes every time you show up, right? So when we're looking at how to balance the dichotomy between convenience and security, it's really important that we leverage where those strengths exist, particularly from cross functions.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. I believe we have one more question.
Irina Volonets. I'm a space me with Sokka Mizrek. So first of all, great job. You have identified a crucial vulnerability within our infrastructure. And second, I would like to add a little bit to the comment made by Ms. Pierce. So as Ms. Pierce mentioned, one of the challenges would be identifying the threat accurately, and the tools and resources would belong to the DoD community. Now, considering that it is a commercial asset, those two don't communicate. That would be one of the challenges that you would have to deal with when working on your project. Another aspect of this is if there was a tool to be established, right, to mitigate the threat, it would need to be continuously monitored because of the rapid speed of our adversaries' cyber capabilities development. So with that said, there would be a very high cost involved, and one of the additional challenges would be to determine who would be responsible for the cost. Would it be the DoD, commercial? Would it be a joint effort? So that there's that. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. One more question over there in the corner.
Appreciate the information. I have a question about your proposal. You initially or briefly mentioned allies implementing zero trust. How do you recommend incentivizing our allies or convincing them to use our policies for zero trust?
Yeah, I mean, that is a tricky question because, I mean, even when we're talking about allies or industries, we all have different perspectives. We're all facing different threats. But I think fundamentally, we have very common national security goals. You know, when we talk about economic stability or safety and protecting the economy when it's linked to technology. That is a global issue, and I would hope that multiple countries, nation states, are concerned about that and want to collaborate on that. I believe it was Stuxnet that actually spread outside of the country it was deployed in into other computers based on economic transactions in the systems that was supporting that. Another thing on that is I would rather see incentives than hard demands. I think both have power, but incentives, I think, are going to avoid that frustration and encourage that enthusiasm to participate in a security lifecycle and contribute threat intelligence that is very much so valuable and can be aided by anyone. And it requires a lot of resources that we can take advantage of around the globe. So those are my few thoughts on it, if anyone else.
I'd also add that in other industries like automotive or aerospace, there's a lot of international companies, I guess I would say. And while the regulations in each industry are indeed a little different, there is, I think, a understanding that as you're creating a part, or in this case, creating a policy, that it's for the benefit of all and not just one country doing their own thing. Certainly that does occur, but there is some harmonization to that.
I think that it is a challenge to get so many nations to work together, but we all essentially have the end goal of securing our spaces. And I think that while we can have a shared framework of an implementation, the actual implementations should vary depending on your individual threat necessities within your country and within your organization. But I think that overall, as a global economy, it would be helpful to establish the baseline, right? Because, I mean, there's a reason they have weight classes in boxing. You can't just show up at 350 pounds and start fighting somebody that's 150, right? So I think that when we're looking at our zero trust architectures, when we're looking at our global implementations, we need to take it from the viewpoint of us not being individual countries, but us being a singular globe, right? And having a baseline of where everyone has an opportunity to compete on the same level would be actually really beneficial to all of the countries at large. But that's probably a much larger conversation that I can't speak to.
Yeah, thank you.
Sort of necking it down a little bit, right? So one of our national security challenges is the competition space. So we need to convince allies, partners, other countries that our stuff, ways, and partnership is better than China, Russia, so on and so forth. So when it comes to zero trust architecture, how do we convince country X that our policies and zero trust architecture is better than the PRC or Russia, so on and so forth? Or is it? I don't know.
That's definitely an interesting question. I fielded a similar question earlier to them personally. A big issue with zero trust is that zero trust is built on organizations and countries, states, trusting the lack of trust that they have in that state. And, that's something that's very hard to describe. In the sense of the international scale, another question I was also seeking to ask these panelists, have you guys ever seen a foreign country, a collection of nations or states that have successfully implemented zero trust? I understand that currently the European Union has some frameworks out there, but I was wondering if you guys had some insight.
I don't have any immediate insight. My first thought, though, would be Estonia, because it has actively worked to transition to a really functional, fully digital government, which means that it would have had to get to a space where they can not only navigate identities, but to also understand the necessity of the data that they're protecting, right? I don't know if any other country has really transitioned fully to that point. Like, even from the United States standpoint, when we're looking at national security, when we're looking at industry, we treat our cloud services like grandma's attic, where we just throw stuff in there and we never want to go back to it. It's fine there if nobody else has access to it, but we don't actually know what we're protecting, right? And so I think that that's really where a lot of our fear comes in with the implementation of a zero trust, because we don't know what needs to be protected. We don't know how it needs to be protected. So when we're looking at trying to get other countries to come and participate with us, we have to bring something to the table. We have to bring a framework that works. We have to find ways to fail quickly and to course correct quickly, right? And right now, I think that there's some areas of improvement for us to be able to do that. We have like 17 conflicting cybersecurity frameworks that can be implemented in a broad variety of ways. And so this does not bode well when I'm trying to get someone to come on my side and do what I say, when I can't even figure out internally how I'm going to do what I say. You know what I mean? So I think that that would probably be one of the first steps to be able to do that. Now, that was 2 questions answered, and I'm going to hand it over to Eric.
I'm not sure I have anything to add.
Additionally, I was going to add on to that. You mentioned some of the characteristics of resiliency, building that resiliency within our own infrastructure. We also additionally mentioned much earlier at the beginning of this that we are very limited by our legacy systems. I was wondering, currently, is zero trust an applicable solution for legacy systems within our critical infrastructures, or do we have to find another solution for these embedded systems?
So I think it's definitely something we use and can use, but you're not at the system level at that point. You're taking that step back. If you look at critical infrastructure, the system itself with the PLCs and which are programmable logic controllers, which are very, very small computers that have no security generally, and control those systems. Like, that's the thing that turns on the pump or turns off the switch. So at that level, that's not where you're looking at zero trust. You're taking steps back to the computers that look at that stuff and get that information out. And that's, I think, where zero trust is more applicable, back further.
Wonderful, thank you. Let's see. Additionally, we've touched on, question down in the front row.
Thank you. My name is Amara Blanton. I'm a senior global conflicts student at Embry-Riddle as well. My question is regarding legacy systems. So this is like a 2-part question. The first one's kind of simple. At what point do you know when your system has become a legacy system? And then second, due to the cost of like transitioning, how can governments or organizations transition between systems to ensure that they don't have the legacy system problem where they run into a security risk with using older systems?
I can answer the first question. Nobody realizes they're getting old until they are old. When you start out creating your system, the anticipation is that this is the system. No one ever concerns themselves about how the system ages. No one concerns themselves about the maintenance and sustainability of that system over time. So how do you know when it's a legacy system?
Because it is. And that's a terrible answer, right? I guess I would add that once it stops being supported, you're in legacy territory. And I think you're right. I think we can all do a better job of taking more maintenance and life cycle of the systems into account. And I'm sorry, what was the other part of that question?
I'll just parrot that question so people in the back can hear. What steps can organizations take to basically remove or upgrade their legacy systems?
That's a great question. I think that taking that step back to take maintenance and life cycle into account is important. When you're looking at critical infrastructure and you're looking at the Hoover Dam, for example, and replacing the motors and I forgot what those are called inside the dam, you know, those are year-long build projects. And to take that into account is really important. And to look at what you're upgrading to. Because, for example, I think the space shuttles were really good examples. That was built with, 1970s, 1980s technology, right? And it worked. And so upgrading as they're still flying in the 90s and 2000s, when things have changed so much, is much more of a serious issue and concern than it would initially seem. Because you're building with state of the art when you're building it, and then that just changes. So I think that's a really important consideration.
Would you consider Windows 10 to be a legacy system or a budding one? As far as I'm aware, Windows 10 will stop being supported in October of 2025.
So I know Microsoft thinks it's a legacy system. For me, I think that a lot of stuff is still developed with Windows 10, and hopefully it's being developed with the mindset that it's going to, we'll have Windows 11. It's hard, I think, to know what's not going to be supported anymore. And I think that in practice, I don't think you can build, I think it's difficult to build a business and to build equipment and processes that are just going to be, everything changes, but it's hard to know how that's going to happen. So I think yes, Windows 10 is going to be a legacy system soon. At the same time, Windows XP was a legacy system, right? And they weren't going to do anything. And then all of a sudden we had Service Pack 2, 10 years later or whatever. So I think it's also up to manufacturers and data practitioners to make sure that those legacy systems are actually, even though they say they're not supported anymore, to do some sort of support for people who are still using them.
Wonderful, thank you.
That's a personal thing.
And now from a defense standpoint, what are some of the mechanisms that attackers have been leveraging against critical infrastructures, and can zero trust be used to interrupt these actions taken to attack?
I'm just going to answer your question real quick, and then I'll get back to your question real quick.
All good.
When you're transitioning from a legacy system to a modernized system, you will need to ensure that you are doing a workflow analysis, because you may be able to cut out some of the non-functional parts there and save some money long-term. You want to make sure that you are doing a cross-training activity, because all of the individuals that know how to leverage that legacy system may not be familiar with the technology that you're transitioning to. And you also need to do technology research to determine if the technology that you're transitioning to is going to be able to maintain your goals for the time period that's established. Then, now, back to your question here.
I can repeat it if you'd like me to.
You say what?
Repeat it if needed.
No, I don't need you to repeat it.
Okay.
So when we're looking at the potential threats that are surrounding these systems, the threats are always the same, right? The threats are, how can we protect the information that is there from unauthorized access? How can we make sure that the information is accurate? And then how can we make sure that it's available? When we're looking at critical infrastructure, as Regan mentioned and as Ann mentioned previously, one of the primary threats to this is going to be availability, right? When we're looking at, are our communications available? Is our water available? Is our transportation available? So when we are trying to determine how we're going to address those particular threats, we look at the same way that we would if we were addressing it from a personal perspective, right? If someone could potentially attack our front door, if someone could potentially attack our window, if someone could potentially attack our back fence, we want to be able to view this threat prior to it coming to us and have some time to prepare and then have an opportunity to react to it based on the prioritization, as Regan mentioned previously, of the information and of the assets that we have. And so when we're looking at the assets that we have, we are going to, again, prioritize them. I'm going to be what I'm going to say is, if someone broke into your house and they were attacking your family, you might prioritize your children over your pets, right? Those pets might be left behind. That's not to say that those pets aren't important when we have resources. That's simply to state that the children are the greater priority. And so we treat our networks the exact same way.
And when you're talking in terms of how are the different objectives and goals of security characterized by the private industry and the federal government? The private industry is hold certain data or certain things that they will not lose information about versus the government? Kind of in terms of like when zero trust is being applied in these industries, private and federal, what do the private industries see as the crown jewels of their industry versus the government?
I guess I'll go first. So I think that private industry sees as their crown jewels a lot of their intellectual property. And I'm not sure I can answer for government necessarily, but it should be the people. It should be the people. And so I think that those goals can be collaborative. I don't think it has to be an either or. But in the sense of zero trust, as we've all pointed out, you definitely have those priorities. So that answer?
Yeah. So you've characterized that there's a mutual goal. Do you think that this mutual goal of critical infrastructures, maintaining system integrity, do you think that this mutual goal shared between the private and federal groups is strong enough to build a feasible and hopefully secure enough zero trust architecture to be utilized?
Well, I'd like to think so. I think it's definitely possible. It certainly takes a lot of collaboration and a lot of compromise on both sides to do that. But I am hopeful. I think it's possible.
All right, wonderful. Thank you, guys. I'm going to open it up to the floor a little bit more here.
Good morning. I have a question that kind of pivots on the availability side of things. So in an application setting of real-time systems that require significant data ingestion to understand their environment, for example, a satellite streaming data to a ground database for geospatial intelligence, where would zero trust lie in this real-world application? And I guess on the engineering side, what would the technology stack look like for that?
Can you repeat the end part of your question, please?
So where would zero trust lie in the technology stack of a system that is very dependent on significant data ingestion in real-time systems?
So you're essentially asking if zero trust frameworks and architectures are secure enough to handle a robust amount of information, of sensitive information being transferred between multiple systems.
Yes, and where would it lie in that tech stack?
Okay, well, I'll start. So, in terms of the significant amounts of data, I mentioned previously that library scientists and data scientists are going to be particularly helpful in analyzing the data to where it makes sense, right? One of the most important things about that particular activity is really refining the data that's coming in to filter out the important data and to get rid of the noise. Because when you spend too much time on the noise, you won't be able to get the full picture of what that looks like, right? When we're looking at the zero trust stack for something like that, we need to consider, unfortunately, so many different portions of that system implementation when we're looking from how the satellites are built, how the ground systems are built, from a supply chain perspective of what can be integrated into that space. We also need to look at how data can be ingested into this broad stream of data that you mentioned from one space to another space. We have to look at how the data is analyzed and filtered from the larger space to the smaller space. And then we also have to look at how the data is leveraged when it's pushed to its next space in that workflow, right? And so at every single one of these touch points, at every single opportunity of a pivot, that's where you want to have some form of a zero trust implementation, whether it's a data enforcement point or a data analysis point, because it's going to drive the next activity that occurs. So when you're looking at what the stack will look like, all of it, all of it.
All right, thank you. Is there any other questions?
Something to add to a previous question in regards to commercial side concern versus DoD side concern. So, for example, in 2016, there was a Russian actor who did a cyber attack on Tampa water purification plant, and they were able to have full control over the levers, so the wrong amount of chemicals were released in the water. Now, the whole attack was able to be stopped at the right time, but when we were dealing with that situation, there was a huge gap and disconnect between DoD community and the commercial community, because commercial's concern was time, functionality, cost. How soon can we fix the problem? How functional the system is going to be after it's fixed? And the biggest one, how much it will cost. To when the DoD community didn't care about any of that, the only thing they cared about was the matters of national security and how safe population of the Tampa Bay is. Now, like I mentioned previously, because of this disconnect, I encourage you to add it to your proposal, as well as the biowarfare aspect, because when the adversary actor mingles with the levers, that creates a biowarfare hazardous material. I think you should really look into that. That's all I have to add. Thank you.
I just want to add on to what it is that you mentioned right here. You and we have very carefully detailed all of the potential threat actors to imply that they are actively attacking or that we are actively under attack. But one of the other things that Zero Trust actually accounts for is internal actors. When Sharon shows up and she's just tired, or when Carl comes in and he's distracted because he's trying to figure out how to pay his kids' tuition and it's coming up due. When we're looking at this Zero Trust architecture, we're looking at ways for us to not only identify those external threats, but to also protect ourselves from all of our internal issues, which Regan brought up previously when we're talking about the security fatigue, when we're talking about the human element in each of these aspects. And so that is a benefit of a Zero Trust architecture, in that we can not only pinpoint the individuals that are doing this, but we can verify that they're doing what they're actually supposed to be doing as well. And we do that consistently.
All right, wonderful. Thank you. Do we have any more questions here before? And I'd like to thank you guys for this wonderful audience and interaction. Loving the questions.
Testing. Hi. I was hoping you could elaborate a little bit more on security fatigue and why it's important for organizations, both either private or federal, to have those proper practices in place to ensure a safe security flow.
Well, so security fatigue and I think we probably all go through this, not just with security, but when you're seeing the same thing over and over and over again, you tend to start to ignore it. It becomes part of your background noise. So from a security standpoint or an alert standpoint, let's say that I have a pump that doesn't function right. And so it constantly sends me an alert that says, hey, I'm not functioning right. And I know that it's not going to be repaired because it's for 3 months because it's not functioning right, but it's still functioning. So I'm going to start to ignore that alert, right? Or I'm going to shut it off. And so when you come to security, I think one of the examples would be MFA fatigue. So let's say I've clicked on a phishing link and somebody has my information, but I have MFA set up, or multi-factor authentication set up so that I have to prove who I am. So the threat actor will ping me at 3 o'clock in the morning over and over and over and over to say, hey, set up your MFA. Hey, approve your MFA. Well, at 3 o'clock in the morning, I'm going to go, fine, done. And I'm going to let those people in, right? Because that's security fatigue. Plus, I'm fatigued on top of it at 3 o'clock in the morning. So from the standpoint of zero trust, to be checking all of that along the way, that gives yet another defense in depth layer of, okay, so I've ignored this alarm. I've ignored this whatever security thing. But zero trust would then say, no, wait a minute. No, you can't really ignore that. Or, hey, that's not your normal behavior. Or, hey, that's not what you should be doing. And throw up yet, hopefully, not necessarily another flag, but do something to make me realize or alert other people that that's not something that should be happening.
When we're talking about security fatigue, it usually occurs on a defensive side, right? Because it's difficult to defend. To paraphrase Kendrick Lamar, from 9 to 5, I know it's vacant, right? Like as a attacker, I only have to monitor your schedule, right? And I can navigate around your weaknesses to get to every other weakness associated with you. As a defender, I have to be concerned not only about a singular method, but all of these other potential methods that are coming at the same time in all of these potentially different ways. And so it's causes a lot of anxiety, particularly if you work in a security operations system, security operations center, where you're a SOC analyst. You have a lot of things coming. You can't afford to miss anything because any one thing that you miss can impact 20 million people on the other end of you, right? But at the same time, you can't see everything. And so when we're looking at a security fatigue, when we're looking at the alerts that come in, this becomes really super important with how we filter that information to only have the important aspects of it. But we're also going to filter that information based on the necessity of the protections of the assets that we're looking at. And so if we are able to do that, we can minimize that security fatigue long term. But in the short term, we have to do the analysis to figure out ways to make that easier on human psyches. Because I'm not just concerned about your network. I'm also concerned about my next paycheck. I'm concerned about my mortgage. I'm concerned about my hair appointment. I'm concerned about my car getting fixed, right? Like I have so many other things in my head. I have to find ways around whatever it is that you find important on your network. So when we're looking at those implementations, it's super, 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 super important to do that necessary data analysis and then to be able to scale back and implement appropriately.
Wonderful, thank you. We are all out of time here. I'd just like to thank you guys for listening to our presentation about Zero Trust for critical infrastructure. Hopefully we detailed what Zero Trust is, what critical infrastructure is, and why it's so necessary for it. Thank you guys, and especially thank you to the staff here at USF for making this all possible and the students who set this all up.